The following interview with Dr. Tom Zinser was recorded in Grand Rapids, Michigan on the 20th of May 2019. One of the books which has been a great influence to me as a therapist is by Dr. Tom Zinser, and it's called Soul-Centered Healing, a psychologist's extraordinary journey into the realms of subpersonalities, spirits and past lives. And I'm delighted today to have the opportunity of speaking with Tom and just asking him a little bit about his experience as a therapist, the insights which have come forward for him, and his perceptions about the whole realm of the inner world which exists within us. So I wonder whether, Tom, to start with, you might be interested just to share a little bit about your background, what led you into this field, and something about the early stages of your journey.
I started out as pretty much a lot of psychologists who use hypnosis. I worked with a method called ego state therapy. There's a number of clinicians who use that method in different ways, but it's understanding subpersonalities. And the idea was, in using hypnosis, was to access memories that were more than likely traumatic and cut off from the person consciously. And the whole process was to help heal those subpersonalities and bring them within the person's kind of consciousness, instead of kind of creating symptoms and pain or distress from an unconscious level.
So you have a sense, Tom, that we are multi-personality, that there are lots of bits of us or parts of us which reside within the psyche.
Yes, I don't have a question now. We all have subpersonalities created, especially as children and young adolescents, where the ego identity, the person is not really strongly formed yet. And so a child and an early adolescent is quite vulnerable. And when abused or traumatized or terrified, if a child's not able to tolerate that, then a subpersonality may be created to take over for that limited time. And once the trauma is past and the child, in a sense, is safe to be conscious again, that subpersonality doesn't disappear. It moves to the unconscious mind.
Right. So we have these parts of us which we're carrying around as sort of real characters inside of us, but they're part of our unconscious self rather than what we would normally regard as our waking ego self.
Yes. Unless these parts have been identified and brought forward and healed, they remain at an unconscious level. They are like little conscious personalities. And the problem is that they're caught in the space-time where the trauma happened, usually.
Yes.
And that's their world. So they're not creative, they don't know what's necessarily going on in the person's present reality. So it's a narrow reality that they live in. But if something happens outside, or something goes on inside a person that's upsetting, these subpersonalities can be triggered, and when they come forward, they're going to respond or act like they did during the trauma. Mm-hmm. Because to them, that's still where they're at.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the outside world can act as triggers to these parts, which then become agitated and then start to cause distress, which a person sometimes can't understand or evaluate.
Absolutely. When people in their everyday life are in situations that are especially are emotional or intellectually threatening, that fear can trigger these parts, and they're going to try to protect the way they did back then, and the person may not understand why they're reacting the way they are. So that's a whole inner world, and these are the parts that need healing.
Yes, and so your early work was focused into trying to connect to these parts and bring to the surface to begin to help heal them.
That's basically the kind of practice that I did as a psychologist. It's working with dissociative disorders.
Yes.
And the problem that I ran into is that, in a sense, with different clients, the closer we got to the trauma, it's like the more defenses and stuckness would happen. And this went on for some time in my practice. And there were successes, there were things that were helpful, but there were also a lot of blocks. And that became frustrating in the sense that my clients weren't moving into something what they needed to, and I didn't know how to help them get through that.
Okay, so you hit a sort of impasse in your work where you were, as I understand it from the discussions we've had, you almost felt like giving up. And then something came forward which gave you some new insights.
Well, impasse is the word. I was coming to an impasse. To be a therapist and want to help,
Yeah.
and then being frustrated a lot in not being able to do what you think was called for. So yes, I did wonder if I was going to have to change professions or quit clinical work. And as it happened, a young lady that worked in the psychology practice I was part of, she was an accountant. She was only there 2 days a week. I didn't really, stuck back in the office. I didn't know her very well. But she had overheard a colleague and myself talking about, in the hypnosis, people do relate about having out-of-body experiences, and we were just discussing something about that. And as she listened and told me later, she went home that night and went back to an experience she had when she was very young, where someone seemed to want to write through her, like it wasn't her thoughts.
Yeah.
And she stopped that because it frightened her. Well, she told me then that she had gone home that night and had once again kind of opened herself to that, and she said that a spirit guide was there, and his name was Jared, and she felt like she needed to tell me about this, and she offered me a session with Jared.
Okay.
I had never thought about consulting a psychic.
This might have seemed extraordinary from someone coming from a sort of orthodox background, suddenly to be confronted by someone who's talking about automatic writing and channeling guides and so forth. You were probably quite taken aback by.
Well, I would. There's a little part I left out, and that is I was encountering strange phenomena with clients.
Yes.
I did look into these kind of phenomena, especially something like possession, pretty dramatic. But when I went to kind of explore this kind of issue about another client, I found a whole section of the library devoted to psychic, paranormal, all kinds of phenomena that I grew up, I didn't know about.
Yes.
So I had done some reading
Right.
myself.
Yeah.
I don't know that Catherine was aware of that. I don't think she was. So when she talked about it, I never thought about doing it myself to have a session.
Right.
But I was aware of channeling.
Yes. Yes.
But the thing is, I said yes. I mean, my curiosity was, what did I have to lose?
Absolutely.
So I did meet. We arranged to meet in a couple of weeks, and we met at my office on a Saturday morning, and August 1, 1987. Catherine went into a trance, and Jared announced that he was here, and I could ask what I wanted. So I asked a number of questions. I didn't really know what to ask, but I did ask about a client situation, and Jared gave me some information that to me was strange, as far as the client I was dealing with. And Jared's information is that there was a spirit present with this person.
Right.
That was out of the blue to me.
Yes.
But when I went back the next week with that information, when this person was in trance, I asked questions as if I was communicating to a separate entity.
Okay. So we now moved on from just thinking about parts of the personality, the subpersonalities, the ego states, whatever terms we want to use for them, to now thinking about outside entities or outside spirits which have somehow attached to the psyche.
That was my understanding of what he was saying. And with this person, of course, I had become stuck about who this voice was. I didn't even know what to say to it.
Okay.
With Jared's information, in a sense, he suggested some things I could say and some things to think about to help this spirit. Well, when I went back to the next session with this person, asked those questions, I began to get a communication. And you know when you're communicating.
Yes, I know from my experience.
Yeah,
yes.
back and forth, and it's
Yes.
making sense, and this is making sense to me, and I think I'm talking to what Jared had said was a spirit.
Yes. And so how did you feel about that? I mean, was that, did it make sense, or was it something quite startling for you in some ways?
I would have to say that it was a surprise, but it was extremely exciting that maybe there were some things that could get me through these blocks and get my client through these blocks.
Okay, yes.
And after that session, and after working with this person, about a month later, I asked Catherine if she would be willing to do another session. And she said she was. And this time I did communicate with Jared about more clinical kinds of questions and got more information. And then taking that back to clients in the next week or so. The same thing happened.
Okay. And in this sense, Catherine was writing down the answers.
It was all being written through with automatic writing.
Yes.
She's in a trance and she's not looking at the paper, she's just writing. I'm reading over as she's writing. It was a very, it's an awkward way to have to communicate. But we did have another session, and after a second session, a month later, I asked again if she would do a session. What happened is that we agreed to work together, and Catherine agreed to meet with me and channel Jared and let me ask whatever questions.
That must have been quite exciting for you.
Absolutely.
Yes. Particularly, I guess, because you could begin to see the benefits in relationship to the clients that you were working with.
Well, the way it proceeded, in my mind, is that I began to have sessions every week, once a week with Jerry. I would write questions during the week, client questions, but I would also write what I would call metaphysical questions. They weren't about clients, but about kind of the bigger picture and the metaphysics.
Mm.
So I had those two levels of questions always for Jerry. But what was most powerful is the clinical information he gave me was working.
Yes.
And the process that I developed was that every session with Jared was recorded. Every session was then transcribed. With every client that Jared would give information about, the client knew I was asking for the information, but I did not give them that information ahead of time
Okay.
until I had worked with the client.
Yes.
After I had dealt with what I considered Jared's information, then I would give the client a copy of the transcript part that pertained to them.
Mm-hmm. So they weren't aware before your session what Jared had said,
Right.
what he'd indicated, but they were open to allowing you as the therapist to bring forward into the session what you felt was appropriate.
Yes, and for me that was critical,
Yes.
that I have some kind of verification that did not suggest to my client something ahead of time.
Yes.
Like Jared said this or Jared said that, or
Yeah, yeah.
and then my client never knew what questions I was going to ask once entering trance.
Right.
But if that information was effective, if I began to get a response to that, what I was asking,
Yeah.
then I could check out that information.
Mm.
And Jared's information was checking out week after week.
Mm.
So it was a very exciting step to possibly have answers to when I encountered these blocks. And in my mind, that's exactly what happened, is I began to be able to get around these blocks, resolve the blocks, understand the blocks, and communicate to the inner world in a way that could free these subpersonalities to come forward,
Yes.
share and heal what they needed,
Yes.
but also identify separate entities that may be affecting or intruding or attaching to clients, that became very important too.
Mm. So it was starting to open up a whole new world view, if you like, of what's going on within us, not only the parts of us, but also other energies which can be influencing us from the outside.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I basically came to think of this work as operating at a psychic and spiritual dimension.
Yes.
That the subpersonalities I thought of most as psychic beings.
Mm.
They were parts of my client's soul. They were created as part of the client's energy, but they acted as separate psychic beings and could communicate with me. So at that point, yes, the whole thing began to open up in terms of looking at an inner world that had a number of different aspects and parts. And Jared began to teach me about what was there.
Okay. Maybe what we should do, Tom, just pause at this stage, and perhaps we can have another session where we can look at all of the what Jared brought forward for you,
Okay.
as a cosmological perspective.
Okay. The big picture.
The big picture.
Or a bigger picture.
For part 2 of this interview, please click the link.